On November 20th, 1966, the Lunar Orbiter 2, NASA's probe, photographs this... What the heck are they doing on the moon?
Landing on the moon was one of humanity's greatest achievements, but not every detail made it into the history books. A near disaster before liftoff, eerie sounds from deep space.
Noises reportedly were heard in May 1969 by the Apollo 10 astronauts.
I didn't mean to keep it sound outer space, didn't it? Do you hear that whistling sound?
And a speech written for a tragedy that almost happened. What else has been kept from the public? These are the 20 most horrifying details about the Apollo missions that NASA tried to hide. Number 20. The US-Soviet joint lunar program proposal that never was. In the midst of the heated space race, a shocking proposal emerged that had the potential to change the course of history. President John F. Kennedy, in a surprising move, suggested a joint US-Soviet mission to the moon. The very idea of the two rival superpowers setting aside their differences and collaborating on such a monumental endeavor seemed unthinkable at the time. Kennedy's vision was a bold one, born from the realization that the United States could benefit greatly from the Soviet Union's expertise in space exploration. The Soviets had already achieved remarkable feats, such as sending the first man into orbit, and their knowledge could have been invaluable in the race to reach the moon. However, this groundbreaking proposal was not meant to be. A series of tragic events, including Kennedy's assassination, derailed the plan and left it to fade into the pages of history. The ongoing rivalry between the US and the Soviet Union proved too strong to overcome, and the two nations continued their separate quests to conquer the final frontier. One can only imagine how different the world might be today if Kennedy's vision had come to fruition. Would the United States and the Soviet Union have found common ground and forged a new era of cooperation in space? Or would the joint mission have been plagued by the same tensions and mistrust that defined their earthly relations? The US-Soviet joint lunar program proposal remains one of the great what-ifs of the space race, a tantalizing glimpse into a future that never was. Number 19. The speech Nixon never gave. As the world watched with bated breath, President Richard Nixon prepared to deliver the most important speech of his career. The Apollo 11 mission was underway, and astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were on the cusp of making history by setting foot on the moon. But there was another speech waiting in the wings, one that Nixon hoped he would never have to give. This alternate address, written by Nixon's speechwriter William Safire, was a chilling reminder of the risks inherent in space exploration. The speech began with the haunting words, "Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace." It was a somber acknowledgement of the possibility that Armstrong and Aldrin might not make it back alive, that they could be stranded on the lunar surface forever. The mere existence of this speech underscores the incredible bravery of the Apollo 11 astronauts, who knew full well the dangers they faced and yet still chose to embark on this epic journey. Number 18. The test flight that nearly cost Neil Armstrong his life. Neil Armstrong is remembered as one of the greatest heroes of the space age, the first man to set foot on the moon. But few people know how close he came to losing his life before he ever had the chance to make that historic leap. In 1968, just a year before the Apollo 11 mission, Armstrong was piloting a lunar landing research vehicle at Ellington Air Force Base in Houston. The machine was designed to simulate the conditions of a moon landing, allowing astronauts to practice their skills in a controlled environment. But on this particular day, something went terribly wrong. As Armstrong hovered 200 feet above the ground, the vehicle suddenly malfunctioned, sending it spinning out of control. In a matter of seconds, it crashed into the earth and burst into flames. Miraculously, Armstrong managed to eject from the vehicle just in time, narrowly escaping with his life. Number 17. The whistleblower who exposed NASA's darkest secrets. In 2007, a stunning confession emerged that sent shockwaves through the space community. William Rutledge, claiming to be a former NASA official, came forward with a tale so incredible that it seemed like something out of a science fiction novel. According to Rutledge, the Apollo missions that followed the historic moon landing were far more than mere scientific endeavors. He alleged that a top-secret mission, known as Apollo 20, had been carried out with a very specific objective in mind: to explore the far side of the moon and investigate an enormous alien spacecraft that had been discovered there. Rutledge claimed that he had been part of the covert mission, along with 2 other astronauts, and that they had successfully entered the extraterrestrial vessel, discovering technology far beyond anything ever seen on Earth. He even produced grainy footage that purported to show the interior of the alien craft, sparking heated debate among UFO enthusiasts and skeptics alike. Officially, NASA has denied the existence of Apollo 20 and dismissed Rutledge's claims as nothing more than an elaborate hoax. But for those who believe in the possibility of extraterrestrial life, his story remains a tantalizing glimpse into a world of secrets and hidden agendas. Number 16. The missing tapes that could rewrite history. On July 20th, 1969, an estimated 650 million people around the world watched in awe as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first humans to set foot on the moon. The grainy, ghostly images that were beamed back to Earth from the lunar surface have since become some of the most iconic and enduring symbols of human achievement. But what few people realize is that those famous images were not the original recordings of the moon landing. In fact, the raw, unedited footage captured by the Apollo 11 crew was stored on a set of high-quality magnetic tapes that were supposed to be preserved for posterity. Somehow, however, those tapes have since disappeared without a trace. The missing tapes have become the subject of intense speculation and conspiracy theories, with some suggesting that they may have contained evidence of extraterrestrial activity or other anomalies that NASA wished to keep hidden from the public. Others believe that the tapes may have simply been lost or erased due to bureaucratic incompetence, a tragic loss of irreplaceable historical artifacts. Despite extensive searches and investigations, the fate of the missing Apollo 11 tapes remains unknown. Some hold out hope that they may one day be rediscovered in a forgotten warehouse or storage facility, while others believe that they are lost forever, taking with them the unedited, unfiltered record of one of humanity's greatest triumphs. Number 15, the near miss that almost ended in tragedy. As the Apollo 11 spacecraft hurtled back towards Earth, its crew exhausted but elated after their historic moon landing, they had no idea that they were on a collision course with disaster. Just hours before re-entry, Mission Control detected an unidentified object in the spacecraft's vicinity, moving at tremendous speed and apparently on a direct intercept course. Alarms sounded and tensions mounted as the astronauts braced for impact, unsure if their fragile vessel could withstand a collision with an unknown piece of space debris. At the last moment, the object veered off course, missing the spacecraft by mere inches. It was a moment of sheer terror and relief for the crew, who suddenly realized just how vulnerable they were in the vast emptiness of space. In the years since, the identity of the mysterious object has remained a closely guarded secret, with some speculating that it may have been a piece of classified military hardware or even an extraterrestrial probe. Others believe that it was simply a bit of space junk, a remnant of an earlier mission that had drifted into the Apollo 11 spacecraft's path. Number 14, the mission that nearly tore Apollo apart. As the Apollo program pushed forward after the tragic Apollo 1 fire, NASA was eager to prove that it had learned from its mistakes. Apollo 7, crewed by Wally Schirra, Don Eisel, and Walt Cunningham, was meant to be a triumphant return to crewed spaceflight, demonstrating the safety and reliability of the redesigned command module. But almost from the moment the mission began, tensions among the crew threatened to derail the entire endeavor. Schirra, a veteran of the Mercury and Gemini programs, clashed repeatedly with Mission Control, arguing over everything from the mission schedule to the food they were provided. As the situation deteriorated, some at NASA began to worry that they were witnessing the beginnings of a mutiny in space. The crew's bickering and insubordination were a black eye for the agency, and raised serious questions about the psychological stresses of long-duration spaceflight. In the end, Apollo 7 triumphed, mastering its critical objectives and blazing the trail for humanity's giant leap to the moon. The mission's complex dynamics reshaped NASA's approach to crew selection and spacecraft operations, refining the formula that would carry Americans to lunar heights. Number 13. The tragedy that changed NASA forever. The Apollo program was born from the highest of hopes, a grand vision of human exploration that would push the boundaries of what was possible. But before it could even get off the ground, it was rocked by a tragedy that would change NASA forever. On January 27, 1967, the Apollo 1 spacecraft was undergoing a routine pre-launch test when disaster struck. A fire broke out in the command module, fueled by the pure oxygen environment inside the capsule. Within seconds, the blaze had engulfed the spacecraft, trapping the 3 astronauts inside. Virgil Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee never had a chance. Despite their best efforts to escape, they were unable to open the hatch and perished in the flames. It was a horrific end to 3 promising lives and a devastating blow to the entire space program. The Apollo 1 fire forced NASA to confront serious flaws in its safety protocols and engineering practices. It led to a major overhaul of the Apollo spacecraft, with new materials and design features implemented to reduce the risk of fire. Number 12. The low-fuel dilemma that threatened Apollo 11. As Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin descended to the lunar surface in the Eagle lander, they faced a crisis that could have spelled the end of the Apollo 11 mission. With each passing second, their fuel supply dwindled, threatening to leave them stranded on the moon with no way home. The trouble began when the onboard computer overloaded, forcing Armstrong to take manual control of the spacecraft. As he searched for a suitable landing site, precious fuel was being consumed at an alarming rate. By the time the Eagle finally touched down in the Sea of Tranquility, the astronauts had less than a minute's worth of fuel remaining. Had they continued their descent for just a few seconds more, they likely would have exhausted their propellant and crash-landed on the moon. Armstrong's quick thinking and skilled piloting undoubtedly saved the mission, but the low fuel dilemma highlights the razor-thin margins that defined the Apollo program. Every decision and every maneuver had to be executed with utmost precision, as even the slightest miscalculation could have led to disaster. Number 11. The lightning strikes that nearly doomed Apollo 12. Just seconds after the Apollo 12 spacecraft lifted off from the Kennedy Space Center on November 14, 1969, a flash of lightning illuminated the Florida sky. The bolt struck the Saturn V rocket, sending a surge of electricity through the spacecraft and threatening to fry its delicate electronics. For a moment, it seemed as though the mission might be lost before it had even begun. Fuel cells disconnected, telemetry data was lost, and warning lights flashed on the control panels. But thanks to the quick thinking and expertise of flight controller John Aaron, the crisis was averted. Aaron recognized the problem from a previous simulation and knew exactly what to do. He instructed the crew to switch to a backup power system, which allowed them to regain control of the spacecraft and continue their journey to the moon. Incredibly, the Apollo 12 mission was struck by lightning not once, but twice during its ascent. The second strike caused even more damage to the spacecraft, but again, Aaron and the crew were able to navigate the crisis and keep the mission on track. This event showcased the remarkable resilience and ingenuity of the NASA team, who were able to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles and push the boundaries of what was possible. Without their skill, dedication, and quick thinking, the Apollo program might have been cut short, and the dream of reaching the moon might have remained just that, a dream. Number 10. The telepathic experiment that defied gravity. As Apollo 14 hurtled through the void of space, a secret experiment was unfolding that would challenge our understanding of the human mind. Astronaut Edgar Mitchell, known for his fascination with the paranormal, had smuggled a set of Zener cards aboard the spacecraft, determined to test the limits of extrasensory perception (ESP) in the final frontier. The experiment was deceptively simple. Mitchell would attempt to transmit mental images of the cards to a recipient back on Earth, defying the vast distances between them. For the duration of the journey, he diligently focused his thoughts, hoping to establish a psychic connection that would transcend the boundaries of space and time. Incredibly, when the results were later analyzed, they seemed to suggest that Mitchell had indeed achieved a level of telepathic communication with his Earthbound partner. The odds of such accuracy being attributed to mere chance were calculated to be a staggering 3,000 to 1. Despite the tantalizing implications of Mitchell's experiment, NASA has never officially acknowledged its existence, leaving many to wonder about the true nature of his findings. Some dismiss the results as mere coincidence, while others see them as evidence of a hidden realm of human potential waiting to be unlocked. Number 9. The Otherworldly Symphony, heard on the dark side of the moon. During the Apollo 10 mission, as the spacecraft orbited the far side of the moon, the astronauts on board were suddenly struck by an eerie sound that seemed to emanate from the depths of space itself. The noise, described as a high-pitched whistling or whining, was so unexpected and otherworldly that it left them questioning their own sanity. The sound lasted for nearly an hour and was picked up by the spacecraft's radio equipment, leading some to speculate that it may have been an intentional transmission from an unknown source. Others have suggested that it could have been caused by the interaction of the solar wind with the moon's magnetic field, creating a natural radio emission. Despite investigations by NASA and independent researchers, the true origin of the space music heard by the Apollo 10 crew remains a mystery. Some have even drawn comparisons to the mythical music of the spheres, a concept that dates back to ancient Greek philosophy and suggests that celestial bodies emit harmonious sounds as they move through the cosmos. Number 8. The lunar enigma that challenges everything we know. In November 1969, as Apollo 12 astronauts Charles Pete Conrad and Alan Bean descended to the lunar surface, they had no idea that their mission would unveil a mystery that would challenge our understanding of the moon itself. After deploying a set of seismometers on the moon's surface, the astronauts were surprised to discover that the readings they received were unlike anything they had expected. The data seemed to suggest that the moon was not a solid sphere of rock, as had long been assumed, but rather a hollow structure that reverberated like a bell when impacted. This startling revelation has since given rise to a controversial theory known as the hollow moon hypothesis, which suggests that the moon may be an artificial construct created by an advanced civilization for purposes unknown. Proponents of the theory point to the unusual seismic data as evidence of the moon's hollow nature and argue that its many anomalies and inconsistencies cannot be explained by natural processes alone. Skeptics, of course, dismiss the hollow moon theory as baseless speculation and insist that the seismic data can be accounted for by the moon's unique composition and internal structure. Number 7. Landing in stormy weather and rough seas. In the final moments of the Apollo 11 mission, as the spacecraft hurtled through Earth's atmosphere and splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, millions of people around the world held their breath, waiting for the first glimpse of the returning heroes. But when the cameras finally cut to the recovery site, they were met with an eerie, unsettling sight. Nothing but an empty expanse of ocean, with no spacecraft or astronauts to be seen. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed as though the unthinkable had happened, and that the Apollo 11 crew had been lost forever. But then, through the static and interference, a voice crackled over the radio. "We're okay. We're in the water." It was a moment of pure relief and exhilaration as the world celebrated the safe return of the moon landing crew. But in the chaos and confusion of the splashdown, a crucial piece of footage had gone missing. The video of the astronauts emerging from their spacecraft and being hoisted aboard the recovery helicopter. Conspiracy theorists have long pointed to this missing footage as evidence that the moon landing was faked, arguing that NASA deliberately withheld the video in order to conceal the truth. But in reality, the missing footage was simply the result of a technical glitch, caused by the stormy weather and rough seas that plagued the recovery operation. Despite the official explanation, however, the missing Apollo 11 recovery footage remains a stubborn enigma. fueling countless theories and speculations about what really happened on that fateful day in July 1969. Number 6. The perilous detour that nearly derailed Apollo 11. As the Apollo 11 lunar module descended toward the moon's surface, its crew readied themselves for the most critical moment of their mission. But as they peered out the window, they realized something was terribly wrong. Instead of the smooth, flat expanse they had expected, the landscape below was a treacherous maze of boulders and craters, some as deep as 30 feet. Buzz Aldrin, looking at the onboard computer, realized they had overshot their intended landing site by nearly 4 miles. With fuel running low and alarms blaring, Neil Armstrong took manual control of the spacecraft, desperately searching for a safe place to land. For several heart-stopping minutes, he navigated the lunar module over the unforgiving terrain, knowing that one wrong move could spell disaster. Finally, with just seconds of fuel remaining, Armstrong found a clear patch of ground and brought the module down for a nail-biting landing. The Apollo 11 crew had narrowly averted catastrophe, but their mission was far from over. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. According to some whistleblowers, NASA allegedly arranged a secret Apollo 20 mission to explore the dark side of the moon and establish contact with extraterrestrial life. However, the mission ended in disaster. 2 astronauts were sent, but contact was lost. Months later, their shuttle mysteriously returned, without communication. What was found inside was so disturbing that it remains one of the most horrifying details about the Apollo missions that NASA tried to hide. The astronauts' suits were torn and covered in grime. One of them was dead, while the other was barely alive. His body mutilated, his face unrecognizably deformed. The sight was beyond comprehension. What do you think about this? Share your thoughts in the comments. Number 5. The computer glitch that nearly aborted history. Imagine the scene. The Apollo 11 lunar module, 33,500 feet above the moon's surface, preparing for its final descent. Suddenly, the spacecraft's computer begins flashing an error code, threatening to derail the entire mission. For the astronauts aboard, it was a moment of sheer terror. The error, labeled 1202, indicated that the computer was overloaded and couldn't process all the data it was receiving. With the lunar surface rapidly approaching, there was no time to troubleshoot. At Mission Control, a young engineer named Steve Bales had to make a split-second decision. He quickly determined that the error could be safely ignored, allowing the mission to proceed. But for a few heart-stopping moments, the fate of Apollo 11 hung in the balance. Had Bales made a different call, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin might never have set foot on the moon, and the course of human spaceflight could have been altered forever. Number 4. The icy menace lurking in the lunar module. After their historic moonwalk, Armstrong and Aldrin returned to the lunar module, eager to rest and prepare for their journey back to Earth. But as they went through their checklist, Mission Control noticed something alarming. The spacecraft's fuel line, vital for powering the ascent engine, was showing a dangerous pressure buildup. Temperatures on the moon's surface can plunge to negative 298 degrees Fahrenheit, and it appeared that the extreme cold had caused a portion of the fuel to freeze solid. If the blockage weren't cleared, it could lead to a catastrophic explosion during liftoff, stranding the astronauts on the moon, or worse. With no way to physically access the fuel line, the crew and Mission Control could only watch and wait, hoping that the pressure would equalize on its own. Incredibly, after several tense hours, the problem resolved itself, and the mission was able to proceed. Number 3. The jammed hatch that trapped the astronauts. After their successful moonwalk, Armstrong and Aldrin were eager to return to the relative safety of the lunar module. But as they attempted to seal the hatch behind them, they encountered a problem that could have ended in tragedy. The hatch, which had been designed to open outward to accommodate the astronauts' bulky spacesuits, refused to close properly. After repeated attempts to force it shut, the crew realized that the culprit was likely a small piece of lunar dust wedged in the hinge mechanism. With oxygen rapidly venting from the spacecraft and no way to safely remove their suits in the cramped confines of the module, the astronauts were faced with a grim reality. If they couldn't get the hatch closed, they would be trapped on the moon with no hope of return. In a desperate gambit, Aldrin used a pen to depress the hinge mechanism, finally allowing the hatch to snap into place. It was a moment of sheer relief for the crew, who had come within inches of a tragic end to their historic journey. Number 2. The broken switch that nearly stranded them in space. After their successful lunar landing and moonwalk, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin faced one final challenge that threatened to maroon them in space forever. As they prepared to return to the command module, they discovered that a critical circuit breaker switch had broken off, potentially rendering their ascent engine useless. Without the engine, the astronauts would have no way to lift off from the moon's surface and dock with the command module for their journey back to Earth. They would be stranded in the lunar module, with no hope of rescue. Thinking quickly, Aldrin improvised a solution using a felt-tipped pen to depress the switch and complete the circuit. It was a tense moment, fraught with uncertainty. But incredibly, the gambit worked, and the engine roared to life. As the lunar module ascended from the moon's surface to rendezvous with the command module, the astronauts could only marvel at their incredible luck and ingenuity. The broken switch had nearly cost them everything, but through skill, resourcefulness, and a bit of improvised engineering, they had snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. Number 1. Why the moon remains untouched for over 5 decades. After the triumphant Apollo 11 mission that saw humans walk on the moon for the first time, it seemed like the sky was the limit for NASA's lunar ambitions. However, just a few short years later, the Apollo program came to an abrupt end, leaving many to wonder why we never went back to the moon. The decision to halt lunar missions after Apollo 17 in 1972 was a complex one, driven by a combination of budget constraints, shifting priorities, and a changing political landscape. The Apollo program, while a resounding success, had come at a staggering cost, both in terms of money and human lives. As the United States grappled with pressing domestic issues, such as poverty and civil rights, the expensive lunar missions became increasingly difficult to justify. Moreover, NASA's focus began to shift towards other scientific endeavors, such as the development of the Space Shuttle program and the exploration of the outer planets. The agency recognized that having achieved the historic feat of landing humans on the moon, it was time to set its sights on new frontiers. The geopolitical context of the space race also played a role in the decision to end the Apollo program. With the United States having firmly established its dominance in space exploration, the urgency to continue sending astronauts to the moon diminished. The Soviet Union, once a fierce competitor, had turned its attention to other aspects of spaceflight, such as long-duration space stations and robotic missions. In recent years, there has been a renewed interest in returning humans to the moon. NASA's Artemis program, named after Apollo's twin sister in Greek mythology, aims to send the first woman and the next man to the lunar surface by 2027. This ambitious initiative seeks to establish a sustainable presence on the moon, using it as a stepping stone for eventual missions to Mars and beyond. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.